My name is Ethan Vance. For 5 years, I was the senior risk architect for Vanguard Horizon Group, a multi-billion-dollar real estate private equity firm operating out of Manhattan. I'm not a smooth-talking broker or a flamboyant developer. My expertise lies in macro forecasting, forensic asset valuation, and isolating highly devalued, distressed commercial properties before the open market even realizes they are failing. I build the math that makes billionaires wealthy. But in the cutthroat corridors of Vanguard Horizon, data was often stolen by those who couldn't calculate it themselves. My closest colleague was Christian Thorne. Christian was the epitome of corporate nepotism. He was charismatic, meticulously groomed, and the nephew of one of our primary institutional board members. While I spent 14-hour days analyzing municipal debt registries and tracking offshore holding liabilities, Christian spent his time playing golf with the executives, subtly taking credit for the quarterly performance reports I generated. I tolerated it for a long time, believing that absolute technical competence would eventually outshine corporate theater. I was wrong. The turning point initialized when I uncovered the crown jewel strategy. Through a deep forensic audit of foreign corporate distress filings, I discovered a massive, ultra-luxury 10,000-square-foot triplex penthouse overlooking Central Park. The property was legally held by a complex web of shell companies tied to an umbrella entity based in Eastern Europe. Because of severe internal corporate restructuring among the foreign owners, the penthouse was completely stagnant. Legally, it was a ghost asset, worth an estimated $22 million, but obtainable for a mere $6.5 million if liquidated through a highly specific municipal debt purchase loop I had engineered. It was the ultimate career-making play. The acquisition would net Vanguard Horizon an immediate, massive equity spike, and the performance bonus alone was structured to pay out a life-changing $1.2 million commission, along with a permanent promotion to managing partner. I spent 3 months building the acquisition architecture, compiling the international compliance paperwork, and locking the entire strategy into our secure, private team portal. On a Friday afternoon, 3 days before I was scheduled to pitch the strategy directly to the Global Investment Board, I received a sudden, automated system alert. My corporate security tokens were returning a critical access denial. Moments later, my desk phone rang. It was the Human Resources Department. When I walked into the executive boardroom, Christian Thorne was already sitting there, flanked by the Senior VP of Operations. On the mahogany table sat a sleek, black termination folder. "Ethan, we're restructuring the risk architecture division," the VP said, not even looking me in the eye. "As of 5 p.m. today, your position has been eliminated. Your pending commission structures are being dissolved under the standard at-will employment clause on page 14 of your contract. You have 30 minutes to clear your desk." I looked over at Christian. He was leaning back in his leather chair, a smirk playing on his lips, turning a high-end fountain pen between his fingers. "Don't take it personally, Ethan," Christian said smoothly, his tone dripping with unearned triumph. "The firm needs dynamic leaders to execute high-level acquisitions, not just spreadsheet analysts. I reviewed your crown jewel file this morning. It's an acceptable framework, but the board agrees that my execution strategy is what will ultimately close the deal. Thanks for doing the heavy lifting." They had systematically scrubbed my name from the server logs, duplicated my 3 months of forensic research, and utilized their internal board connections to execute a flawless corporate execution. Christian wasn't just stealing my promotion. He was taking the $1.2 million commission and the $22 million penthouse for himself. "You really think you've calculated every variable, don't you, Christian?" I asked, completely calm, setting my security badge flat on the table. "I don't need to calculate variables, Ethan. I own the asset now." Christian laughed, adjusting his tailored cuffs. "Enjoy your severance. I'll think of you when I'm looking at the skyline from the master balcony." I walked out of the building into the pouring Manhattan rain without saying another word. What the brilliant Christian Thorne and the executive board failed to realize was that I hadn't just archived the penthouse's financial data. I had mapped its entire international legal history. In Christian's desperate rush to download my files and present the strategy to the board as his own, he skipped the final, unindexed addendum in my private database. He saw a $22 million luxury asset available at a massive discount, but he completely failed to check the underlying sovereign tax compliance matrix. The foreign holding company that owned the ghost Penthouse wasn't just a standard offshore vehicle. It was a subsidiary directly tied to a sanctioned foreign conglomerate that had quietly been placed on a classified international banking restriction list just 48 hours prior. By taking my strategy, rushing the closing sequence, and legally transferring the title of that penthouse in his own name to claim the executive bonus, Christian hadn't just secured a luxury estate. He had just walked directly into a multi-million-dollar federal trap, and the door was about to lock from the outside. Christian Thorne wasted no time enjoying his stolen glory. Within 30 days, Vanguard Horizon Group had finalized the debt purchase loop, and Christian legally moved into the triplex penthouse. He plastered his social media with panoramic views of the Manhattan skyline from his new wraparound terrace, soaking in the praise of the corporate elite. He was heralded as the firm's new golden boy, the savant who acquired a $22 million asset for a fraction of its value. To celebrate his unearned promotion and his new estate, Christian threw a lavish, high-profile cocktail party at the penthouse. The guests included top-tier real estate developers, senior partners from Vanguard Horizon, and several high-ranking city officials. I wasn't there, but I monitored the public geotags and the International Asset Registry data streams from a secure laptop in my new office. At exactly 9:15 p.m., right when the party was hitting its peak, the music in the penthouse suddenly died. The main elevator doors chimed and slid open, but it wasn't more wealthy socialites stepping out. It was a team of 6 badge-wearing federal agents from the Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, and the Internal Revenue Service, IRS, accompanied by 2 armed U.S. Marshals. Ladies and gentlemen, this gathering is officially concluded, the lead federal agent announced, his voice slicing through the affluent chatter. We are executing a federal asset seizure warrant. Everyone not residing at this address must vacate the premises immediately. Christian stepped forward, his face flushed with alcohol and sudden outrage, pushing his way through his wealthy guests. What is the meaning of this? Do you know who I am? I am a managing partner at Vanguard Horizon. This property was legally acquired through a standard municipal debt liquidation. The lead agent didn't flinch. He pulled a heavy, certified legal document from his briefcase and slapped it directly onto Christian's tailored chest. Mr. Thorne, this triplex penthouse was purchased from a blocked foreign umbrella entity tied to Eastern European sanctioned capital. The agent stated coldly, loud enough for every senior partner in the room to hear. Under federal emergency banking laws updated this year, executing a transaction with a sanctioned entity is a strict liability violation. This property is now classified as a frozen foreign asset. Christian's jaw dropped. That's impossible. Our internal risk assessment cleared the transaction. Your internal risk assessment was fraudulent or completely incompetent, the agent countered. By putting this deed into your name to claim your executive bonus structure, you legally assumed personal liability for the transaction. As of 8 p.m. tonight, the Department of the Treasury has frozen your personal domestic bank accounts to secure a pending $3.5 million civil monetary penalty for international sanctions evasion. You have exactly 24 hours to vacate this property before it is physically sealed by the United States government. The wealthy guests instantly began retreating toward the exits, whispering in absolute horror. The senior partners from Vanguard Horizon looked at Christian as if he were a walking biohazard, physically backing away from him as the U.S. Marshals began placing neon orange federal seizure notices directly onto the luxury glass doors. Christian stood in the center of his ruined party, clutching the federal warrant, looking out at the glittering lights of Manhattan as his entire corporate reality imploded around him. The master broker had stolen a $22 million trophy, only to realize he had just chained himself to a multi-million-dollar federal anchor. The fallout within Vanguard Horizon Group was catastrophic. By Thursday morning, the firm's compliance department was in total lockdown. Because Christian Thorne had executed the transaction under the firm's institutional umbrella, the federal government hadn't just frozen his personal accounts. They had launched a comprehensive forensic audit into Vanguard's entire offshore acquisition pipeline. The firm's stock price plummeted 14% in 48 hours as major institutional investors began pulling their capital out of the fund, terrified of being tied to a federal sanctions investigation. At 2 p.m., I received an urgent, confidential calendar invite. The location wasn't an office. It was a private, encrypted digital conference room hosted by the Global Investment Board's Senior Defense Counsel. While I logged in, the screen was filled with the anxious faces of the firm's top executives, along with the senior VP of operations who had fired me just weeks prior. Christian Thorne was noticeably absent. "Ethan, thank you for joining," the senior VP said, his voice entirely stripped of its former cold, corporate authority. He looked utterly exhausted. "We've been reviewing the master data logs for the crown jewel asset loop. The federal compliance lawyers tell us that the foreign entities block occurred 48 hours before your termination. We see a hidden addendum in your private project folder that wasn't included in Christian's final brief to the board." "It wasn't hidden," I said, leaning back in my chair, taking a slow sip of water. "It was an unindexed sovereign tax compliance matrix. Christian didn't see it because he didn't read the international registries. He just downloaded my spreadsheets, changed the author tags to his own name, and rushed the closing sequence to claim the managing partner bonus." The firm's chief defense counsel leaned forward in his camera. "Mr. Vance, Christian Thorne has been placed on indefinite administrative leave without pay. The firm is facing a catastrophic systemic freeze. If the Treasury Department proceeds with the full civil penalty, Vanguard Horizon will lose its primary institutional licensing. Your unindexed files contain a structural off-ramp, a legal clawback mechanism designed to reverse the transaction if a sovereign status changes. We need you to deploy it. Name your terms." I smiled, pulling up the compliance matrix on my secondary monitor. "My terms are non-negotiable," I stated calmly. "First, Vanguard Horizon Group will issue a formal public retraction of my termination, citing a systemic administrative error, and restore my employment status to active for the past 30 days to preserve my historical equity vesting." The senior VP nodded frantically. "Done. Absolutely. What else?" "Second, you will execute a total, absolute liquidation of Christian Thorne's partnership shares for gross professional negligence, routing his entire dissolved equity pool into my personal portfolio as a one-time structural retention bonus. Third, I am not coming back as a spreadsheet analyst. I am taking Christian's vacated seat as managing partner of the Risk Architecture Division, with a veto power over all international asset acquisitions." The boardroom fell into a stunned, heavy silence. The executives looked at each other, realizing that I had just mapped out a complete corporate takeover of my own division, using their own panic as leverage. "Ethan, you're asking for over $2 million in dissolved equity and absolute control over the division," the VP stammered. "And you are looking at a $35 million federal liquidation and the total destruction of your fund's market cap if you don't file the clawback paperwork by 5 p.m. tomorrow," I reminded him, my voice completely cold. "I didn't create the trap, gentlemen. Your golden boy walked into it because he was too lazy to look at the math. I am simply offering you the code to unlock the cage. But the code has a market price." The chief defense counsel looked at the VP, then looked back at me. "Sign the digital authorization," the counsel ordered. "We have no other choice." By 9 a.m. the following morning, the digital ink was completely dry on my new executive contract. The corporate servers had been updated, and my access tokens didn't just work. They gave me root-level administrative authorization over the entire Vanguard Horizon network. I walked onto the top floor of the Manhattan office dressed in a sharp, bespoke charcoal suit. No more muddy boots or overlooked spreadsheet desks. I was the new managing partner of Risk Architecture. I walked straight into the central glass command center and initiated the counter-strategy. Isolate the crown jewel asset folder. I instructed the legal tech team. Deploy the unindexed sovereign tax compliance matrix. We are triggering the sovereign non-compliance clawback clause on page 89. Because I had engineered the transaction architecture with an intentional deep layer safety buffer, The contract contained a highly specific consumer protection mechanism. If a foreign counterparty's legal status changed due to international sanctions within 90 days before or after the closing sequence, Vanguard Horizon Group held the absolute unilateral right to immediately declare the transaction null and void, returning the asset to the municipal debt pool and clawing back 100% of the invested capital. I clicked the Master Authorization token. The digital data streams lit up on the main wall monitors. In a matter of seconds, the legal notices were automatically filed with the Department of the Treasury, the IRS, and the international banking registries. The $6.5 million in acquisition capital was pulled back into Vanguard's primary capital reserve, completely clearing the firm of any illicit transactions. The federal sanctions freeze on the company was instantly lifted. The asset was safely returned to the municipal grid, but Christian Thorne was left completely exposed. By claiming the personal title and the $1.2 million executive bonus on a fraudulent transaction, his personal liability was entirely detached from the firm's safety net. At 2 p.m., I walked down the corridor to the executive suite. Christian was there, surrounded by 2 internal corporate security officers. The pristine, arrogant golden boy was entirely broken. His face was gaunt, his hands shook as he threw folders into a cheap cardboard box, and his eyes were red with humiliation. All of his partnership equity had been dissolved and routed into my account. He was leaving the building with nothing but a mountain of personal debt and a ruined reputation. He looked up and saw me standing in the doorway, my arms crossed, watching him in absolute silence. "You knew," Christian whispered, his voice cracking with a mixture of raw venom and despair. "You left that tax matrix unindexed on purpose. You set me up." "I didn't set you up, Christian," I replied calmly. "I wrote a comprehensive 300-page risk assessment report that detailed every single global variable. You chose not to read it because you were too busy taking credit for my work and picking out furniture for a stolen penthouse. You didn't fail because of a trap. You failed because of your own laziness." He grabbed his cardboard box, his knuckles turning white, and tried to push past me. "This isn't over, Ethan," he hissed. "My family still has connections on the board. I'll make sure you're blacklisted from every fund in New York. Your uncle voted to dissolve your equity 2 hours ago to save his own portfolio, Christian," I told him as the security guards escorted him toward the service elevator. "In this room, the only connection that matters is the math. And your account just hit 0. 3 months later, the dust had completely settled over the Manhattan real estate market. Vanguard Horizon Group's stock price didn't just recover. It surged an additional 18% after our division publicized its new, hyper-secure automated compliance protocols. As for the ghost penthouse, once the federal authorities completely cleared the municipal debt pool, I used my new executive authority to quietly buy the asset back under a clean, fully compliant domestic corporate entity owned exclusively by my private consulting firm, purchasing it for a final, rock-bottom liquidation price of $4.8 million. I now look out at the glittering lights of the Manhattan skyline from the very wraparound terrace Christian thought he had stolen from me. Christian's reality has become a bleak, permanent devaluation. Unable to pay the $3.5 million civil penalty, his personal assets were systematically liquidated by the government. He was forced to move back into a tiny, rented apartment in the outer boroughs, working as an entry-level cold caller for a predatory subprime lending firm. The corporate elite who once drank his champagne now block his calls, terrified of any association with his compliance scandal. The executive board at Vanguard Horizon treats me with absolute professional deference. They finally understand that a firm's growth is completely meaningless without structural insulation. I took a slow sip of my coffee, watching the digital tickers update on my secure monitor. My colleagues thought they could use corporate theater, unearned privilege, and political maneuvers to build a legacy on top of my mind. They thought that because I was quiet and focused on the data arrays, I wouldn't notice when they tried to push me out of the architecture I built. But they failed to realize that in the high-stakes modern financial arena, you cannot network your way past a structural tax law. You can steal an analyst's file, but you can never replicate the diagnostic foresight required to navigate the trap. The variables will always balance the ledger, and the math will always default to the architect. The fund is stable, the assets are completely clean, and the position is entirely secure. Thank you so much to every single operator in this incredible storytelling community for tracking the legal variables, analyzing the data trails, and supporting this channel through this high-stakes corporate takeover. Your incredible engagement keeps the risk metrics sharp and the narrative flawlessly insulated. If this tactical report reminded you that forensic preparation, absolute patience, and cold technical mastery will always dismantle loud, unearned arrogance, please smash that like button right now. Drop your analytical feedback in the comments section below, hit that notification bell, and subscribe to the channel. Stay precise, keep your capital completely insulated, and I will see you in the next operational update. Take care.